What would you do if the creepiest object in your house turned out to be the most valuable thing you owned? From eerie paintings and strange old keepsakes to forgotten antiques with chilling backstories, these finds shocked both their owners and the experts. Some looked too odd to keep. Some had been hidden away for years. But once their true history was revealed, the fear turned into disbelief, and the prices were anything but ordinary.
Over the years, we have decided as a family that he's probably haunted.
Somewhere perhaps 6,000 to 10,000 pounds.
Heavens.
It's just lovely.
It's beautiful.
Now this is a magical way to start. At first glance, these look like old stage weapons, the kind of props that might sit forgotten in a storage room. But these two Pikes came from one of the most beloved films ever made, The Wizard of Oz. The owner bought them back in 1984 for $595, and at the time, that probably felt like a serious movie memorabilia purchase. But decades later, that price would look very different.
I purchased these swords from the Wizard of Oz movie from an auction company in California. I paid $595 for them back in 1984.
And that is where the fun begins. These were not random fantasy props. They belonged to the Winkies, the guards serving the Wicked Witch of the West. So already, this is not just a pair of spears. This is a piece of Hollywood history tied directly to one of cinema's most iconic villains.
Now, there were probably about 15 of the Winkies, so it's hard to know how many actual spears exist.
The real value comes from rarity and recognition. There were not many Winkies on screen, and there may be even fewer surviving props today. Add the MGM connection, the Adrian costume design link, and the movie's legendary status, and suddenly this old pair of Pikes becomes far more than decoration.
One of them sold in the late 90s for $7,500, and the price has escalated since then. One now on the auction market would bring about $15,000.
Wow.
You have two of them, and two of them would bring in excess of $30,000.
Excellent.
Not bad for a $595 purchase. One Pike could now bring around $15,000, but the owner has two, pushing the estimate beyond $30,000. A perfect opening find, strange, cinematic, instantly recognizable, and worth a fortune. And from here, the countdown only gets weirder. Who would ever expect a doll found beside a dustbin to become the most valuable piece in the group? This story begins in the simplest way. A doll collector placed an advert in the paper and then received a call from a woman who said she had a doll sitting by the side of the dustbin. It sounded like something nobody wanted. But that almost discarded object was about to deliver a major twist, the kind that makes people look twice at every forgotten box and every old attic shelf.
I put an advert in the paper because I collect one or two dolls, and a lady saw my ad. She rang me and said, I think I've got a doll in by the side of the dustbin.
What?
When the expert began examining it, he quickly realized this was not an ordinary doll. It was a Bébé by Jumeau, one of the great names in 19th century French doll making.
Well, this little doll is, I'm sure you know, is known as a Bébé. It's by the famous doll maker Jumeau, Émile Jumeau, who was one of the top 5 doll makers in France in around 1860.
Then the small details started to speak. The hand-cut almond eyes, the little line of white bisque between the lips, the number mark on the back of the neck, and the Jumeau mark on the body. To most people, it was just an old doll. To the expert, every detail was evidence that this piece was far rarer than it first appeared.
And I'm going to do this because she's got a mark on her bottom, which shows that she's by Jumeau, Médaille d'Or, Paris.
But the expert was not finished. After comparing it with the other doll beside it, he returned to the main piece and made the key point very clear. This one was a rarity.
But this one is a rarity. And I think you'll find she's probably worth as much as £5,000.
I was told about £800. I thought that was good.
From £26 to £5,000. A doll that was almost left beside a dustbin turned out to be a Jumeau treasure. And that is exactly what makes finds like this so addictive. Sometimes the object someone is ready to throw away is the very thing collectors would pay a fortune to own. Some old dolls look sweet, but others become unsettling before they even move, simply because of where they were kept. This mechanical doll spent years hidden deep inside a dark, cluttered cupboard. And in the owner's childhood memory, it only came out once a year, when her grandmother would wind it up and let it do its thing.
Well, she's been in the family all my life. She belonged to my grandmother, and she used to be kept in the back of a very dark, very cluttered cupboard.
Yes.
And as a treat once a year, if my sister and I really played our cards right, she would be brought out, and my grandmother would wind her up.
And she'd do her thing.
It sounds like a slightly creepy childhood memory, but to the expert, that dark cupboard may have been the reason the doll survived at all. The silk dress had started to deteriorate, as expected after more than a century, but it was still preserved enough to tell the story of its age.
She's dressed beautifully in this silk, which is, it's deteriorating, but it's inevitable. When you think that she was probably made in around 1890, 1900, the fact that your grandmother very cleverly kept her at the back of a cupboard, I'm sure it was nothing to do with keeping her out of your way. She merely wanted to conserve the fabric. And in fact, that has, I'm sure, helped. You can see it's beginning just to go into tatters here.
And this was not just a doll standing still. Beneath it was a velvet-covered box holding the music, cams, cogs, and the whole mechanism that allowed it to move. When the expert turned it around, the small marks on the back of the head began to reveal its real origin.
And there is the letters SH and the number 1300. So in fact, that tells me that she was made by a company called Simon and Halbig.
But the best twist was not the maker's mark. It was the doll's true purpose. People often think dolls were made for children, but a complex automaton like this was not a child's toy. It was created for adults, as after-dinner entertainment for wealthy households. In other words, the strange doll that fascinated children from inside a dark cupboard was actually a luxury mechanical entertainment piece.
They weren't for children at all. They were actually made for adults as after-dinner entertainment pieces, really, a sort of rich man's plaything in a way. They were originally made in Paris, and there were a number of top makers. And she was made by Leopold Lambert.
With automatons, the more movement they have, the more valuable they tend to be. This doll had a tambourine, head movement, and several different actions, and those details pushed its value to around £1,800 to just over £2,000.
And I think that if she came up for auction, we'd be talking about perhaps a figure of between £1,800 and perhaps just over £2,000.
Very good.
Some toys seem to arrive at the wrong time. When they first appear, children find them strange, maybe even a little frightening. But decades later, that same strangeness can turn them into collector favorites. Blythe dolls are exactly that kind of case. They had oversized heads, tiny bodies, huge eyes, and a look that felt almost too unusual for the toy market of the early 1970s. At the time, they may have been difficult to love, but that odd design would eventually become the very reason people wanted them.
Well, we really do have a taste of the 70s here. What drew you to these dolls?
One of the ladies was American, and she brought my sister and myself one each of these dolls from America, and they are from a company called Blythe. They were produced in 1972, and I believe that they only ran for 1 year.
What makes this story work is that the owner does not try to turn her childhood memory into something sweet and sentimental. She admits the dolls were hard to look at for too long because those big eyes gave them an almost alien quality. But that is also what made Blythe dolls stand apart from ordinary toys.
And was quite happy for her to be in the back of my mother's china cabinet and really not to look at them too much because of their slightly maybe alien look, the big eyes. They do have one special feature which makes them even more terrifying. If you pull this string,
The eyes change
the
colour.
eyes change colour.
A doll whose eyes change color. Back then, it could make a child curious and uncomfortable at the same time. But time has a strange way of changing the role of an object. What once felt too weird slowly became a perfect symbol of 1970s retro style, especially when the dolls still came with original clothes, the box, accessories, and those tiny period boots.
I've had this ambivalent relationship with them. I did hate them when I was little and then have grown over the years. The retro feel to these, I think this just captures that groovy 70s appeal.
Absolutely. I think these are so 70s.
And this is where the real value starts to show. These were not just old dolls. They were in great condition, with the boxed set, clothes, accessories, and most importantly, rarity. From a toy once hidden away because its eyes felt too strange, the Blythe dolls could now be worth around £5,000.
They are absolutely in great condition. You've got the boxed set, and they're actually rare. I would say maybe 5,000 with your case, the other dolls, and these fantastic clothes.
A toy once considered unsettling became desirable for the exact same reason. That is the roadshow twist. Sometimes the thing people want to hide in a cabinet is exactly what collectors spend years trying to find.
Well, I ran a toy shop, didn't I,
Yes.
in Devon. And an old lady came one day and said to me, would I like to buy her? Because she felt she ought to get rid of her before she died and give her a good home. I paid her what she asked, which was £100,
Yes.
which I thought was a lot at the time.
£100 around 1975's was not a small amount of money. But when the expert looked more closely, he realized this was not just an ordinary doll. It belonged to Kammer and Reinhardt, the famous German doll manufacturer, and this particular model was commonly known as either Hansel or Gretel.
They're known as either Hansel or Gretel.
Yes.
By the manufacturers, who are Kammer or Kammer, with an umlaut on the A, and Reinhardt.
The numbers on the back of the head worked almost like the doll's identity card. Mold number 114 identified the face, while the number 49 gave the size. But the value was not only about age. Condition mattered just as much. The nose was slightly rubbed, there were a few small scratches, and the shoes were not original. Still, the cheek color was good, the painted blue eyes were strong, and the original dress was still there. That one detail about the eyes could have doubled the value, and that is what makes an appraisal so fascinating. Being old is not always enough. A small variation, a condition detail, or one original accessory can completely change the final number.
Now, had she glass eyes, she'd be probably worth double. It's quite extraordinary. It's probably because they're rarer.
From £100 to around £3,000, or £3,500. A doll that was bought so it could have a good home eventually became a real family asset. And sometimes, an object kept out of kindness turns out to be the very thing that makes an entire family look at it in a completely different way.
Nice original dress. Not original shoes.
I made them.
You made them? Oh, well, very well made.
Not every family heirloom turns out to be a real treasure. This small bureau looked convincing. Elegant shape, desirable size, and the appearance of walnut furniture from the Queen Anne or George I period, around the early 18th century. The family also believed it had passed down through generations, beginning as a wedding gift from a large house in Staffordshire. At first, Everything seemed to fit. But with antique furniture, the family's story is only the starting point. To know whether something is truly old, an expert has to look at the places that are hardest to fake.
So I think when you have a small piece like this of walnut furniture, which is ostensibly Queen Anne, George I, 1700, 1720, you have to look very, very closely at it.
At first, the drawer showed some promising signs: dry oak, decent material, and details that seemed close to early 18th century work. But when the expert looked more closely at the dovetails and the finish, the feeling began to change. Something was not refined enough, not natural enough, as if the age of the piece was being performed rather than created by time.
Well, firstly, it's a well-made drawer.
Yes.
Nice oak showing the medullary rays, very nice and dry, exactly what one would expect from the early 18th century. But when you look a bit more closely, the fineness of the dovetails is not brilliant. It's not as well done as I'd like it to be.
Then the expert asked the most important question: did this ware really look like nearly 300 years of use? The answer turned the entire family story upside down.
Now you have to ask yourself, does that look like nearly 300 years of wear? I'm going to have to use a word I don't think I've ever used on a roadshow. I think it's a fake.
Oh!
What looked like a nearly 300-year-old antique was finally exposed as a fake. And yet, even after that, it could still retail for around £3,000. That is the perfect roadshow twist. The truth may break a family legend, but sometimes the real value begins the moment an object is finally seen for what it truly is.
I think the person who made this intended for it to look old, but it has a value. I can see that retailing for it certainly £3,000.
Oh!
Not every treasure needs a bargain bin story or a dramatic flea market discovery. Sometimes the real surprise is that an object has survived almost untouched for more than a century. And this doll is exactly that kind of find. And when an antique survives like that, the question becomes simple: how much has that careful preservation changed its value?
Absolutely wonderful. She's got all her original clothes, and someone has looked after her so well.
At first glance, she looks like an elegant French doll. But to the expert, she belongs to a very specific category: Swivel-Head dolls, also known as Fashionable dolls. These were made to wear the clothing of their time, which means the costume is not just an accessory, it is part of the doll's identity.
Well, she's French. She's made of Bisque, which is probably, as you know, unglazed porcelain. But the interesting thing is we call them Swivel-Head dolls or Fashionable dolls because they were made to wear the costume of the day.
A doll from around 1860 is already special, but one that still has her underwear, heeled leather boots, marks under the soles, and an almost completely original presentation is something different. Those small details tell the expert that this is not just an old doll. This is an old doll that was kept properly.
She's got all her lovely underwear and the boots, which are wonderful heeled leather boots, and they have a mark underneath, which is a T.
Maybe the mother or grandmother never knew exactly what she was worth, but they knew she deserved to be protected. And after years tucked away in a box, inside a cabinet, this quiet family keepsake was finally placed in front of an expert. So, what would all that care add up to? £3,000 for a doll preserved quietly through generations. No cheap yard sale, no dustbin discovery, no shocking rescue story. Just one family's careful protection, turning an old French doll into a genuine hidden treasure.
And you've had her just tucked away in a box?
Oh yes, in a cabinet, yeah.
I think for insurance, you should be insuring her for £3,000.
Amazing.
Some objects are hard to place at first glance. Are they funny, frightening, historical, or just deeply strange? This figure is exactly that kind of piece. It is not merely an odd decorative statue. It is believed to represent Sir Geoffrey Hudson, a real figure from the court of Charles I and Queen Henrietta, And the story behind him is even stranger than the object itself.
He's an effigy of a real Sir Geoffrey Hudson,
the famous 17th
century dwarf. And he was, Chris will tell you, 18 inches high.
He was originally 18 inches tall when he was in the court of Charles I and Queen Henrietta.
A real man, only about 18 inches tall, was said to have appeared at royal banquets by bursting out of an apple pie. It sounds almost made up, but it reflects a very unusual part of court culture at the time. Still, Sir Geoffrey Hudson was not only remembered as a court entertainer, his life was also connected with horsemanship, duels, the Civil War, and loyalty to the royal family.
Geoffrey Hudson was a very famous figure. He was born in 1619, died in 1682. He was a court favourite, as you say, of Charles I.
Charles I.
So the figure in front of them is not just grotesque decoration. It combines a real historical person, old stories, military symbols, and the imagination of the 19th century. The expert notices the armor, the matchlock gun, the unusual coat of arms, and even the Sphinx above. Not everything fits history perfectly, but that is exactly what makes it so fascinating.
If we look at him, he's very much a mixture of idea. And I think what we have here is a figure that represents a mixture of myth and mythology and reality. Fanciful figure coming to life in the guise of a real person.
That is the strongest idea in this case. Myth, mythology, and reality all living inside one strange figure. It is not contemporary with Sir Geoffrey Hudson, and it is not a royal relic from the 17th century. It is a 19th century curiosity, turning history into something decorative, bizarre, and unforgettable. And even though it is not as old as the person it represents, its value is still significant.
I think the date is certainly 19th century.
He has a centrepiece. He's a centrepiece in the pub.
So the maximum price, I would think, would be about sort of £3,000 as a 19th century curiosity with good historical background.
Around £3,000 for a grotesque 19th century figure with a strong historical background. It may not be a true royal artifact, but it is strange enough to become the centerpiece of a pub, and rich enough in story to make viewers stop and look twice. Do you think the expert's valuation matches how unusual this piece really is? This piece began with a trip to Europe in 1969, when the owner was only 14 years old. His family stopped to visit one of his father's friends south of Paris, and, by chance, that visit led directly to the family of Alexander Calder.
When I was 14, I traveled to Europe with my parents, and it turns out his friend was married to the daughter of Alexander Calder.
That detail makes the story much more than a simple line of provenance. As a young boy, he saw Calder inside his studio. He had seen Calder's hand affected by Parkinson's, but when the artist began working, that same hand became still. Then his 15th birthday arrived during that very trip, and the gift he received was not an ordinary souvenir.
I had my 15th birthday while we were there, and that was in July of 1969. And he presented me this sculpture as my 15th birthday present. I saw him working in his shop on something similar to this.
A sculpture given directly by Alexander Calder, and possibly made by him around the same time the owner had seen him working in the studio. For a work of art, provenance like that is almost impossible to improve. But the experts still had to examine the object itself, the structure, the movement, the signature, and Calder's place in 20th century art.
Calder is one of America's leading sculptors of the 20th century. And this is wonderful because you have the base and this amazingly balanced piece.
It is both stable and moving. A very Calder kind of balance. Simple at first glance, but carefully calculated in weight and motion. The piece has a monogram, it is handmade, and most importantly, the story behind it is almost unbelievably strong.
I've never heard of better provenance on something artistic than what you've given us. But it still has to be submitted to the Alexander Calder Foundation. They authenticate pieces.
Even with remarkable provenance, the art market still needs official authentication. But even before that final step, the expert gave a number that completely changed the mood of the case.
They're fairly rare, and especially in this size. In a gallery setting, this would be $250,000.
Wow. Jeez, that's amazing. I mean, it's probably worth more than that to me, just in memories, but that's spectacular.
Yeah.
$250,000 for a birthday gift. But for the owner, the memory may be worth even more than the number. This is not just a Calder. It is the moment a 15-year-old boy stepped into the world of a great artist and carried a piece of that memory with him for the rest of his life. If one old doll is enough to make some people uneasy, then a doll with several heads takes that feeling to another level. This case begins with exactly that strange idea. One body, multiple heads, each with a different hairstyle, expression, and personality. For the owner as a child, it was not just one doll. It felt like 4 dolls inside the same box.
Well, I've heard of multiple personalities, but this really does take the biscuit, doesn't it?
Well, no, I liked it. I was rather fascinated by it. And I did used to put the different heads on from time to time.
Yes, because
it's like having 4 dolls.
The concept is clever, but also a little unsettling. Change the head, and the whole character changes. One head had sleeping eyes, another had short hair, another had blonde curls, and another had braids. But for the expert, the real key was not just the number of heads. It was the maker's marks and the original box.
She is made of bisque, or the heads are made of bisque, because it says here Germany and the number 174. It actually says Kästner, and Kästner will be or is the name of the manufacturer.
Kästner is an important name in the world of German dolls, and like many valuable doll cases, the connection to Thuringia gives the story more weight. But the maker is only part of it. What makes this set stand out is that it is still in its original case, with the label, and in condition so good the expert can hardly believe it was ever played with.
And Thuringia was the great doll-making area of Germany in the 19th century. In its original case, with the label still there, almost unplayed with. Now,
I did used to play with it.
You were obviously incredibly careful. Date.
That is the sweetest twist in this case. The owner really did play with it, changing the heads from time to time, yet kept it carefully enough that more than a century later, almost everything was still complete. And in collectibles, complete can be the difference between an ordinary item and one worth chasing.
And I would have said that the doll herself, just as she comes, would be worth perhaps £300 or £400. But with the other heads and the fact that she's complete in her original box, I would have thought we're talking about more like £1,500.
One doll on its own might be worth only a few £100s, but with the extra heads, the original box, the label, and a nearly complete condition, the value rises to around £1,500. This case is not a 6-figure shock, but it proves a very real rule. The more original and complete a collectible is, the more its value can change. Some antiques are not made to please everyone. Some people love them, some find them strange, and some just stare at them, wondering why they are worth so much. Martin Brothers Wally Birds are exactly that kind of object. Grotesque, humorous, slightly weird, but full of personality.
There are fewer things more distinctive than Martin Brothers pottery. It would be a very mixed and split audience between love, loathe, and plain curiosity.
Back in the 70s, one could buy Martin ware very cheaply in London.
The owner was one of the people who saw their appeal early. Back in the 1970s, when many still dismissed Martin ware as odd or difficult, he began buying it. A few £100 was still a serious investment at the time, but compared with today's values, those purchases now look like opportunities that may never come again.
You're a pioneer. So what were you paying? I mean, I'm curious, what were these things costing you back in the 70s?
Well, this was 450, April 76.
Right.
This I bought in Sandwich, about 650.
The Martin brothers were 4 siblings, but Robert Wallace Martin was the name that made these birds famous. He was not creating safe beauty. He was creating personality in clay. Some birds look serious, some look ridiculous, and some seem to be hiding a private thought.
I mean, 4 brothers, you know, you've got Robert Wallace, Charles, Walter, Edwin, and of course the genius is Robert Wallace. He's the Grand Master. He's the absolute pinnacle of what was going on there, creating these wonderful grotesque birds, as we now call them, with wit and humour and curious little look.
Then the valuation began, and each number pushed the case higher. The vase with Wally Birds was already worth £10,000. The large bird in the middle had a firing line across the beak, which held the value back, but even with that flaw, it still reached £40,000.
That vase today, £10,000. He does have a little firing line across his beak, which unfortunately will hold the value back. And it's a shame because as a result, that means he's only worth £40,000.
Only worth £40,000 is the kind of line that makes viewers stop for a second. But the final piece went even higher. A double bird from 1907S, desirable, strong-looking, and valued at £60,000.
And because it isn't as big, but it is a double, it's worth £60,000. So your pioneering spirit, nearly 40 years ago, has resulted in a table collection here well in excess of £100,000.
Objects once seen as weird, bought for only a few £100s, had become a table collection worth well over £100,000. This case proves something very real about the antique market. It does not always reward the crowd. Sometimes, it rewards the person who sees beauty before everyone else understands it.
My mother found this in an attic when her parents bought a shore house north of New York City.
It was made by Penobscot Indians, who are the traditional tribe who inhabited most of Maine.
This is a carved root club made by the Penobscot people. Objects like this carried different meanings over time. War clubs, ceremonial pieces, and later trade objects made for travelers, hunters, fishermen, and collectors. But what makes this piece special is not only its shape. The real story is in the details carved into the wood.
In the old and early days, prior to colonization, clubs such as this were used as war clubs, and they would make objects such as this to trade.
The 3 leaf motifs, the serious face, and the markings that look like war paint all point back to the forest, the trees, and a spiritual world. For indigenous people, a tree was not just raw material. It carried reverence, ancestry, and the memory of a community.
These little 3-leaf designs are typical of the eastern woodlands. Everything was about trees, which were reverent. Indigenous people actually felt that the spirits of their ancestors resided in trees, so they had a great deal of reverence for them.
The expert recognized that this was not a clumsy first attempt. The face had strength, almost like a warrior or a figure from Penobscot legend. The condition was also strong. It was not badly worn, and it still carried the patina of time, dust, oxidation, and the attic where it had rested for years.
So this face is interesting. This is almost like a portrait. This is not the individual's first effort. This is really a well-accomplished carving.
Then the expert gave a number that made everyone pay attention. It was not a market-shaking figure, but the owner's reaction changed the emotional weight of the entire case.
I think perhaps in the range of $2,000. If I was going to insure it, I would appraise it at $2,500.
I've always had it around. It touches me because it was my mother's.
I can't tell you how meaningful that would be to the gentleman who made this.
It's a voice. With that one line, the object became more than a carved root club. It became the voice of a mother, of family memory, of the person who carved it, and of a cultural tradition still speaking through something that had once sat quietly in an attic. Not every object on roadshow shocks people with a value in the thousands. Some pieces grab attention because of one simple question: how has this even survived? These two chocolate figures are exactly that kind of find. One is Tommy Atkins, the other is an ambulance nurse, both connected to the First World War. Chocolate is meant to be eaten. It melts, breaks down, spoils, or simply disappears. But somehow, after more than a century, these figures have kept their shape.
Chocolate Tommy Atkins, number 6971, and I've got ambulance nurse. And they've survived intact.
That's right, yes.
And where did you get them from?
I got late godmother. She died in September, and I've been clearing her house out.
Right.
And I've been told they're about 1920s.
Well, they're made by Pascal's, London.
They were found while clearing out the house of the owner's late godmother. At first, they sound like small objects hidden among family memories. But the expert immediately understands that these are not just old sweets. They belong to a time when even chocolate could carry a patriotic message, bought in support of soldiers and those serving during the war.
And I have seen one or two of these before, but never in complete condition. Now, I mean, this is very unusual survival, really. If you were patriotic in the First World War, you would have bought these chocolates in support of the troops.
What makes them both charming and slightly creepy is that contrast. These are not porcelain figures. They are not metal keepsakes. They are chocolate, something created to vanish. Yet these two tiny figures have survived almost like they were frozen in time. And of course, there is one thing the expert has to make clear. They are definitely not something anyone should eat.
What would somebody pay in a sale for them? Probably somebody would pay further to £50 to £100, something like that.
Right. Okay.
But good fun, though.
Yes, that's right.
Around £50 to £100 for the pair. The number is not huge, but this case is still unforgettable, because sometimes the value is not only in the money, it is in the strange survival of a small object that should never have lasted this long. First World War chocolate still shaped like human figures, funny, unsettling, and a tiny piece of everyday history that somehow refused to disappear. Antiques Roadshow has appraised paintings, ceramics, furniture, and jewelry. But appraising someone's forearms? That is definitely not something you see every day. This case begins with a chance meeting with Peter Blake, the celebrated British pop artist.
Peter Blake came to a shop that I work at. It's a fashion shop.
So we're talking about Peter Blake,
Peter Blake, the artist,
the famous, celebrated pop artist of the 60s and 70s.
Peppers,
and living today, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
What started as an ordinary conversation inside a fashion shop suddenly became a moment that could never be repeated. One of the brothers worked in a tattoo studio nearby, and the decision happened almost immediately. A temporary signature on skin would be preserved forever in ink.
So you're brothers, right?
Yeah, we're twins. Yeah.
Oh, you're twins.
And I work in a tattoo studio around the corner. So we asked them to sign us, and then we're then going to go after meeting them and get them tattooed. So.
Okay, so as soon as you'd written them on your arms, you banged them permanently down
straight away.
in ink with a tattoo.
That was my lunch break.
That was my lunch break. And the result was two living works of art. Peter Blake himself seemed to enjoy the strangeness of it. From that meeting, the twins also ended up with signed cigarette packets, a signed record cover, a postcard, and an artist-proof small-looking items at first. But once a famous name and a real story are attached, the value starts to change.
About it, so
for you as living works of art?
Yeah. So it's quite a nice thing.
What a cracking story.
Then the expert began valuing the pieces one by one. A signed cigarette packet, around £300. A record cover bought cheaply from a charity shop after Peter Blake signed it, also around £300. But the real jump came with the Brick Lane artist proof.
If I can start with the cigarette packet, well, I'm going to put 300 quid on there. I think I'm going to put on the signed record cover, which a bit like the fag packet. You know, it looks like something appealing. You know, it's and beautifully presented, and presentation is all. You know, and having glass in front of these things, you have to stand back. 300 quid.
Okay. Yeah.
And this, not everyone's taste, Brick Lane, but nonetheless a very powerful image, should be worth around about £500–600.
Yes.
A few personal keepsakes had turned into a small pop art collection with its own unusual provenance. But the strangest items were still the two forearms. The expert did not treat them like ordinary objects for sale, because some things are simply meant to stay in the family.
Thank you. Very well.
They are genuine Peter Blakes. He's signed them.
Yeah.
And you've gone off, worked on top. So they've got provenance. They've got form, as we say in the art world. And when it comes to evaluation, well, I think some things you need to keep in the family.
Yeah.
This was no longer just a signature. It was a story written on skin, a once-in-a-lifetime moment made permanent, and perhaps one of the strangest artworks ever brought onto Roadshow. Sometimes the treasure is not on the front of an object. It is hidden at the back, inside it, or exactly in the place the owner thinks is a problem.
I bought it 6 years ago in Stowe, and I was a little concerned when I got it home to notice that the drawers seemed to be made out of recycled pieces of timber. I wonder whether it's entirely original. Well, you should see the second drawer is even more interesting, in as much as it's more brightly coloured.
In just a few seconds, the owner's concern turned into the expert's excitement. The recycled timber did not reduce the value of the chest. In fact, it may have been the rarest part. The expert explained that on large estates, leftover wood from older projects was often kept in the workshop, then used years later for more practical furniture.
Well, let me allay your fears first of all. There's nothing wrong with this. It was cut for a purpose and then simply not used and kept in the workshop.
And here came the real twist. If the chest itself was made around 1740s, the panels inside it could already have been 150 years old. What the owner feared was suspicious recycled wood turned out to be decorative panels from the 16th century, possibly Tudor or early Elizabethan.
And if this was made in 1740, these panels were 150 years old. These panels are 1500, 1550, 16th century. Difficult to be precise. Either Tudor or early Elizabethan. But never have I seen the pigment protected, as it were. This is like the day it was painted.
That is what makes this case so fascinating. Those panels may once have belonged to an old paneled room, carved and painted, before being hidden inside drawers for hundreds of years. The darkness protected the pigment almost perfectly. An object that seemed to have a flaw was actually preserving something older than itself.
Imagine, a paneled room. These are from a paneled room, I'm sure.
It's not a Tudor rose, is it?
Well, yes.
Almost stylized.
Yes, absolutely. A stylized Tudor rose.
The owner paid £1,000 for the chest. The chest itself was already worth that amount, but the two panels inside became the unexpected bonus.
Well, it's worth £1,000, a little fruitwood chest of drawers. I mean, certainly improved on that in 6 years. But these are a bonus. I suppose that panel is worth about £1,000. And that one £1,000.
It surprised me.
It's very exciting. Very exciting.
A chest bought for £1,000 ended up hiding two panels worth around £1,000 each. But the real shock was not only the money. It was the idea that 16th century painted color had quietly survived in darkness. Inside a drawer the owner once thought was a warning sign. Some pieces of jewelry are valuable because they have been passed down through a family for generations. But this bracelet is far stranger than that. Hidden inside it may be fragments of material almost 2,000 years old. At first glance, It looks like an unusual antique bracelet. But when the expert studies the gold mounts and the small pieces of glass, the story immediately splits into two timelines. The bracelet itself belongs to the Georgian period, while the glass reaches much further back.
The gold mounts with the fittings and the composition, which is a very classical shape, would have been made in the Georgian period. It dates from the end of the 18th century, or perhaps around about 1800. Prior to that, they hadn't been made since Roman times.
In other words, the bracelet was assembled at the end of the 18th century, but the glass inside it is not Victorian glass or 19th century Venetian glass. These are fragments of Roman glass. What had come down through the family as a small piece of jewelry was actually carrying traces of the ancient Roman world.
So what we're looking at is a collection of fragments of Roman glass mounted together at the end of the 18th century. So it's just come down in the family as a little piece of jewellery.
Those pieces of glass may once have belonged to bowls, jugs, or vessels. After centuries underground, glass decomposes and develops a silvery iridescence. Collectors then polish the fragments again, allowing the colors inside to reappear. And when the expert says they may date from around the 1st century AD, the bracelet stops being ordinary jewelry.
They all date from around about the 1st century AD. So we're going back to almost 2 millenniums, I suppose, ago.
Inside it are techniques such as millefiori and latticino, glass-making methods the Romans once mastered and that were later forgotten for a very long time. So the value comes from both sides. Rare Roman glass, and the way those fragments were mounted into an elegant Georgian jewel.
Well, there's this one here, that's millefiori, individual canes. Next to it, even more remarkable, we've got latticino.
Then came the final number, and it was enough to make the owner almost afraid to wear it again.
Somewhere perhaps 6,000 to 10,000 pounds.
Heavens.
It's just lovely.
It's beautiful. I definitely won't wear it now.
A family bracelet had become a £6,000 to £10,000 piece of jewelry, holding fragments of glass nearly 2,000 years old. And this is the kind of case that makes people wonder. How many old jewelry boxes are hiding a history far older than anything their owners ever imagined? Some objects are disturbing not because of how they look, but because of what they were used to sell. This model is called the National Tomb. More than 100 years ago, it could have sat inside a funeral home, not as decoration, but as a sales tool. A funeral director would use it to show grieving families how a burial vault worked.
This is something that you would have found in a funeral home a little over 100 years ago. This was filled with water, was raised up, and then you could take the top off, show the family the casket. Your loved one is dry inside of this burial vault.
That detail is both practical and chilling. Water was poured into the model to prove that your loved one would stay dry inside the vault. But behind this strange funeral object is a very human story. The owner has been a funeral director in Denver since 1988, and the model came from the collection of a friend who had worked as an embalmer for 45 years.
I've been a funeral director in Denver since 1988, and I was with a friend who died, who was an embalmer for 45 years in Denver. His family asked me if I would like his funeral history collection, and so I absolutely said yes. I've sold most of it and started a memorial scholarship fund in his name.
So this funeral item carries another layer of memory: friendship, profession, and a scholarship fund created in someone's name. The expert calls it a trade stimulator, an object designed to encourage a sale by showing customers exactly how something worked.
It's a real great example of what's called a trade stimulator. It's by the National Vault Company in Galion, Ohio.
The condition is not perfect. The base has been repainted, and the top has been repainted as well. But for collectors of salesman samples, this is still a fascinating piece, unusual, functional, and tied to a very specific professional history.
Obviously, the base has been repainted.
Yep.
The top up here is also repainted, but it's a very cool item that's very desirable for people who collect salesman samples. It's a good auction item in a $2,500 to $4,500 price range.
$2,500 to $4,500 for a model once used to sell burial vaults. This case is morbid, practical, and unexpectedly emotional at the same time. It speaks about death, but also about work, memory, friendship, and how an old commercial object can become part of funeral history. Some questions are enough to pull viewers closer to the screen the moment they are asked, "What is in the box?" And in this case, the answer is not jewelry, historical papers, or a rare piece of pottery. Inside the box is a plaster head, real human hair, real human eyelashes, and a fake hand, so strange and unsettling that it is almost impossible to look away.
Inside the box, we found this wonderful plaster head with human hair, human eyelashes, and a strangely realistic human hand. What can you tell us about the contents of the box?
I don't know if anyone has heard of Willie Sutton. He was a famous bank robber, well-known bank robber. He was also well-known for breaking out of prisons. This was his that he used in an attempted breakout.
Willie Sutton was not only famous for robbing banks, he was also famous for escaping from prison. And the head in this box was not some bizarre decoration. It was part of a failed prison break plan, a dummy head and a dummy hand, placed in a bed to fool the guards into thinking Sutton was still lying there.
He had reportedly robbed over 100 banks. He had escaped successfully from prison 3 times, and this is a dummy head and dummy hand that he used in an unsuccessful escape from prison.
Yes.
Well, and the prison was run by your grandfather.
Yes.
In this case, provenance is everything. Without the story of the owner's grandfather working at the prison, and without the box and its label, this might only be a creepy plaster head. But once it is connected to Willie Sutton, it becomes a real crime artifact.
He made this false head using hair from the barber shop, and there's actually real human hair. Same with the eyelashes.
Hair from the prison barber shop, real eyelashes, a head made inside prison, with a hand arranged as if it were gripping the edge of a bedsheet. The more the story unfolds, the creepier the object becomes, because it is not just a prop, it was once part of a real escape attempt.
And after conferring with my colleagues, we were able to give it a very conservative auction estimate of $2,500 to $3,500.
Wow, that's nice. That's very nice. That's surprising.
As far as I know, this is the first head in the box we've had on Roadshow.
$2,500 to $3,500 for the first head in a box on Roadshow. This may be one of the creepiest cases in the entire video, not simply because it is a fake head, but because it was a real fake head, used in a real prison escape attempt by a real bank robber. A wooden devil lying on the floor at a charity sale does not sound like the beginning of a hidden treasure story, but for a Halloween collector, this strange figure had instant appeal. It was odd, handmade, slightly funny, and clearly not something that came from a factory line. The best part was the price. The owner paid only $10 to take it home.
About 25 years ago, I went to a historical society sale where people donated items to keep the historical society going. And I collected Halloween, and I walked in and he was sitting on the floor, and I purchased him. He cost the whole $10.
But the appraiser did not see it as an ordinary Halloween decoration. He saw the spirit of American folk art, a local maker, possibly a mill worker, carving something straight from imagination, humor, and personal belief. The date mattered too. Around 1920 or 1930, America was in the age of Prohibition and the temperance movement, when devil imagery could warn people about alcohol, temptation, and bad habits.
This is the epitome of American folk art. It's just one individual's kind of inspiration and humor and capability, and it's just got such personality. It's the beauty of American folk art.
So the devil that had once sat on a porch every Halloween was suddenly being seen in a completely different way, not as a toy, not as a cheap prop, but as a piece of folk art with real character, history, and market value. Then the appraiser revealed the number.
This piece could probably bring between $4,000 and $5,000.
Wow. Jeez.
From $10 to between $4,000 and $5,000. That kind of jump changes the fate of an object instantly. For 25 years, it had not been locked away like a valuable antique. It sat outside every October, surrounded by cornstalks and Halloween atmosphere.
Well, it sat on my front porch during Halloween for 25 years in October for the whole month.
Right.
And he had the corn stalks around him and everything, and I think we're going to be bringing him in.
You got to find another centerpiece.
Maybe it is finally time for this wooden devil to retire from porch duty. What began as a $10 Halloween purchase had become a true hidden treasure. This case begins like an ordinary appraisal. A golden egg is placed on the table, and the appraiser asks about the family history. But within seconds, everything goes off track. This is not a family heirloom. The guest openly says his family disowned him years ago, and the origin of the object? A friend at the museum lent it to him, except that friend apparently has no idea he lent it at all.
And what is the family history?
Well, no, this is not a family heirloom. Now, my family disowned me years ago. They don't like me. But this is more of an heirloom that my good friend at the museum lent me. He's not aware that he lent it to me.
At that moment, the story is no longer just about how much the object might be worth. The bigger question is whether it should even be there. A precious ancient artifact is already complicated. A precious ancient artifact with a suspicious origin is something much more dangerous.
So that's going to perhaps play into the value because of regulatory issues.
Yes, there'll be a lot of issues.
Then the case jumps from strange to almost unbelievable. The appraiser recognizes it as possibly one of 3 golden eggs commissioned for Cleopatra near the end of her life, around 30 BC. 2 entered public collections, while 1 disappeared during World War II. And if all the ownership problems could somehow be cleared up, the number becomes almost impossible to process.
I recognize that this was one of the 3 gold eggs commissioned by Cleopatra at the end of her life, 30 BC. If we could clear up the complications of how you acquired it, this could sell for over $100 million at auction.
That is amazing. $100 million though, wow.
Over $100 million for a golden egg sounds like the ultimate treasure reveal. But the final line turns the entire case into a perfect joke. After all the myth, the war history, the museum issue, and the legal risk, the appraiser looks back at the object and delivers one last punchline.
It looks like a half-eaten bagel.
And that is what makes this one of the strangest cases of all. Part ancient treasure appraisal, part comedy about the worst provenance imaginable. A family portrait is already enough to make people curious, but this painting came with something darker, a ghost story. The sitter is believed to be Aaron Delano, a young New England sea captain, born in 1767 and lost at sea in 1794. Across generations, the portrait moved from the owner's grandmother's house to her parents' home, and finally into her own hands. And in the family's memory, Aaron did not seem to stay quietly inside the frame.
We believe this is Aaron Delano, and he would be my 5th great-granduncle. He's actually been hanging in my grandmother's house when I was young, and then went to my parents' house, and now I own him. And we believe that he is, through both research and word of mouth, that he was the youngest sea captain in the New England area. He was born in 1767, and unfortunately, he passed away, lost at sea, in 1794. But while he was alive, and we believe he was doing a trade route on the New England coast from Plymouth and Nantucket up the coast to Turner, Maine, and sometimes to Nova Scotia. Over the years, we have decided as a family that he's probably haunted.
But when the appraiser looks at the painting, the haunted part is only the first hook. The real value is hidden in the details. A young man, finely dressed, shown beside a map and a maritime instrument. This is not just a portrait of a relative. It almost tells the viewer his occupation, his status, and the life he lived at sea. In other words, the painting is not just asking who he was, it is already giving clues.
We see portraits of people's relatives all the time, and very, very seldom do we ever see anything with this much going on in it. It's as much an illustration of his occupation as anything else. But he's very handsome, he's young. I love his face and the way that's painted, and I love the patterned cloth on his vest. And there he's using the tools of his trade. That looks like a map, and that instrument is an octant.
Those details are exactly what push the value higher. The painting is oil on canvas, American, and from the 18th century. Its condition is not perfect, with wear and loss visible in places, but the important areas are still strong. The face, the instruments, and the details that caught the attention of the folk art table.
Because this isn't oil on canvas, and we know that it's 18th century, and we know that it's American. So you add all that up with what's illustrated in this, and I think you have something that's very extraordinary in terms of what appeals to people who collect Americana and folk art. We don't know who the artist is, because lots of times these artists were itinerant, and we don't know who a lot of them were. Just in the condition that it's in right now, it's got paint loss. If you look right here, I think there's actually some film on the glass.
Oh, okay.
But most importantly, there's no loss in his face or in the instruments and the detail of the painting that I think really makes it valuable.
Then comes the valuation. A painting once remembered for footsteps in the hallway turns out to be far more than a family ghost story. It has moved from private legend into the world of Americana, where history, identity, and condition all matter.
In as-is condition, its value would be $8,000 to $10,000.
Hey, that's good. It's exciting.
$8,000 to $10,000 for the portrait of a sea captain who vanished at sea. What began as a possibly haunted painting becomes a real piece of American folk art history. If there is one piece of pottery that can hold tobacco and still make people shiver the moment they see it, this is probably it. A humidor shaped like a skull, with another smaller skull sitting right on the lid. It is strange, dark, and exactly the kind of scary antique that is hard to forget. $85 at an estate sale. At first, it sounds like something bought for fun because of its bizarre appearance, especially since the owner's family had a connection to Weller pottery. But this skull was not just a decorative sculpture. It had a real function. It was made to keep smoking tobacco from drying out. A large skull used to store tobacco, a smaller skull serving as the knob on the lid. Inside, there was even a place for a sponge to keep the tobacco moist. If this was meant as a reminder of death for smokers, the message could hardly be more direct. But what really caught the expert's attention was not only how creepy it looked, it was how rare it was. From $85 to somewhere around $2,000 to $3,000. It is not the largest jump in roadshow history, but it works so well because the reason is clear. An unforgettable image, a strange function, and possibly only 5 or 6 known examples. This is the kind of object that feels more unsettling the longer you look at it. But for a collector, that exact uneasiness is what makes it worth hunting down.